Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. It's correct. I have a CEO responsibility for one part of Rigshospitalet. I'm also part of the board of management, deputy chief executive. And basically everything has been said already. And then again, my perspective will be on a more systemic level, and how we at Rigshospitalet has tried to approach co-creation and partnerships to be able to solve some of the things that we've heard already. Thank you for great speeches from all my colleagues. Well, you probably... Is it on this one? Okay. You probably all know Denmark from, we bicycle a lot, the Little Mermaid. And then we have a long tradition of building our wealth on agriculture. We don't have a lot of natural resources, and all that agriculture actually has then moved into a very strong life science sector. And I just want to just a little bit of a word on how that has happened, because I do think there's something about our culture that is beneficial for all of us in the Nordic countries. And this is this cooperative movement that was initiated almost 200 years ago, and where you have had a very high level of trust among everybody. Where you actually knew that you had to work together to be able to create more. When the peasants 150 years ago went together and said we need to do things together to be able to be more efficient and have a strong voice, then they agreed that every man should count one vote and not how much land they had or how much cattle they had. I mean, there's something about leveraging out the playing field that has created some of the large companies that we have in Denmark and also across the Nordic countries, and also some of the way that we look about how we drive large companies. So the foundations is an integral part of this. And I believe that this culture way of thinking is the one of those that is going to help us in the years to come to cope with some of the challenges. And we all know that one. We have to do more for less. That's basically what it says. 2 or 3 speakers have already been into this, but we're very aware of that everywhere when you go into a hospital, that is the task. And if you talk to the employees, they would say, but how do we do that? We already run. And I always say to them, you don't have to run anymore. You need to find out how to do this smarter. And then they say, but we can't because we have all those guidelines. And then tell them, well, drop the guidelines and do what you think is the right thing to do as a professional. So we have to utilize the energy that we have in the systems. So just a few words on Rigshospitalet, the oldest hospital and largest in Denmark. See 1.2 million patients a year, a lot of research, all medical specialties and all that. So we claim to be good. I would say that one of the things that we've been working on over the last couple of years is how do we actually look upon ourselves, and how do people look upon us? How do our partners and fellow hospitals in Denmark and also internationally look upon us? And they all said we were very good, but we were also very aware that we were very good, so we were not very good at reaching out. So our new vision for Rigshospitalet is to benefit the individual patient, and we've always done that. But then the second part is, and the overall healthcare system. And it sounds pretty, well, of course. But when you start thinking about it, what does that entail? Because that actually entails that sometimes you should stop treating. Sometimes you shouldn't do what you think is right, but you actually reach out and do what is right for the patient at where they are, at a local hospital or at a community. So it's changing our way of thinking, and thus the cultural road that Timo was talking about. The second part of it was that we also enlarged our working portfolio, if you will. We always work with treatments and research and training, education. It's part of the core task at hospitals. But we added one, so we now have innovation as a fourth core task. And again, it's just a small word, and well, we're already doing innovation, people say, yeah. But if you think about it, that is suddenly go from 3 to 4 core tasks, so that every department, every unit has to figure out how do they encompass innovation as part of their daily operations. Then most of them will be challenged. But that's what we do. We say we have to move innovation all the way into the core of running our business. That means we have to find out structures, responsibilities, all the same things as we have for treatment, as we have for research and education. And I think that's going to be a driving engine in the years to come of how we can change faster, because the acceleration that was mentioned is needed. Otherwise, we can't cope. We got 4 strategies in the vision: value for the patient, connectedness, empowerment, and internationalization. I'm going to only talk about 2 of those because time is running, and we also have to have the panel debate. But this one about empowerment, I'm back to the point that there's a strain of literature that tells us that 75 to 85% of our employees tell us that they can do more if they were allowed. How do you actually make people allowed to do more? Well, you need to tell them that that's their responsibility. And it's also a strain of literature saying that when you take the responsibility and you also do your own decisions, actually you have a happier work life. You actually stay longer at the same work time, even though you work harder and you do more and you're very tired when you get home, but you got the control over your work life. So it's quite important that you actually empower all these people. And by doing that, you also say that the management level have to give off power. And that's a new way of thinking, at least in Denmark, where it's very hierarchical. Decisions always go upwards because somebody at the end, in the top, needs to take the decisions. We need to put that triangle the other way around. And we have worked for that for quite some years. And it's difficult, and most people will say, well, they look happy, these ones, but they also run fast. And that's true. We have to have employees being happy, running fast, because we have to do more for less. And then we have a whole strategy for partnerships and cooperation. And we put a specific focus on internationalization. As Denmark is a very small country, but I think it counts for most of countries in the world, we need to reach out. And we are very quick in getting in love with our own projects, our own way of thinking. So actually reaching out is an essential part. And the best one to promote that reaching out is actually partnering up. Partnering up with large international corporations like Novo Nordisk and others who can actually have knowledge travel even faster than we have. In public institutions, it's very difficult to scale. It's very difficult to have information moving across. Just within our own hospital, it's difficult. Even let it be between hospitals in Denmark, or even let it be across nations. So we need to put that around and say, okay, who can actually help us see what we do good or what we could improve? Well, you need to have partners there who's out there in the market and can actually help us. So our innovation journey, in short, has been 10 years ago. We did all these small innovation competitions, trying to lure out, saying there must be things that we can do in operations that we can do better. And we did. Then 5 years ago, we said, let's try to establish an innovation center to be able to get a little bit more scale on what we are doing. And it grew pretty fast. I think there were 40 people within a couple of years. But then again, it was kind of living on the side of the organization. So last year we said, well, we're going to dismantle the center and then we're going to embed it in all our functions. And you said that was in the mission of the organization. And of course, that entails a lot of development of our own management, clinical management, and at the same time, internally in our staff, they also need to do it. That's why Rasmussen, which some of you was listening to yesterday, is part of that. So actually the mindset about whatever you do, whether you're in accounting or whether you're in HR, you need to know what innovation does for the organization. And the next jump on that will be the strategic integrated partnerships. And it comes in many forms, but one of the important thing for us here is that they are actually long-term. I mean, we're talking partnerships and collaborations over 10, 15 years. It's not one project over half a year or a year. We're talking long-time commitment from us and from the partner that we're partnering up with. And it comes from corporations all at each the level out at each ward or each department, and it also comes in clinical areas, and some of them comes across the whole hospital. And those has to be the driver for the rest of the change. So we're doing quite a lot of work right now to see how do we actually partner up with large international corporations, and not just telling them that now we do 4 projects together with 4 project lines and 4 nurses or doctors who are really eager on those, but actually trying to turn it around and say, what kind of long-term objective or impact do we need to achieve? We don't have to read all this, but it's just basically just utilizing an impact framework that is a very old tool, has been used ever since the 60s, but we've kind of forgotten because we always start down there and say, what kind of projects do we need to do together? So when we do a project, we think we have a partnership. Not in my view, not in our view. We think we have to focus on where do we want to end in 10, 15 years. And we spend a lot of painful time down there, because if you agree where you want to end up, and then you deduct down and you say, okay, in the shorter term, and what kind of output do we need, and what kind of things do we then need to utilize? Then you suddenly end up doing other projects than the normal product lines. You suddenly end up having people in the room from both R&D and sales and various divisions at the hospital, and then suddenly magic happens, because we cannot pick the winners. We have to get out a mechanism that is continuously trying to promote these new interactions. And these interactions will be then spinning off good ideas, and some of them will be products, and some of them will be processes, and some will develop us to be able to do more. And this is the way we try to work with all the large companies. So focusing on the long-term impact. Let me just have a few examples of what we're thinking about, and it's to leap into the future. This is Thomas. He's a head dentist here at our hospital, and he actually worked with Johnson & Johnson and a Belgian firm called Materialize for like 15 years, trying to develop software to be able to planning for surgery. And this has helped us not just improve productivity and efficiency at the OR about 120%. We can do like 1.5, 1.6, even more operations per day. And we have also managed to get down infections. We do 1 operation instead of 4. So it's a golden egg there, but it takes 15 years. Now we got 3 or 4 of engineers embedded in our organizations from the private organizations doing that planning. It's not healthcare professionals, it's other professions. This is Jens. Jens is living with a chronic disease. He's at home. And that's also the way we're going to treat patients in the future. We have with the load coming in, a lot of people have to stay at home. A lot of people want to stay at home. Actually, they get better by being at home. But doing all the monitoring and doing all the numbers and doing all the things so the doctors can actually be proactive, we need a lot of monitoring. So we have a lot of projects going on right now trying to figure out how do we actually get the right vital signs in there. Not easy at all, and some of you have mentioned it already. You can measure everything, but how do you measure the right thing? But that's also where we're going to need each other, because we will not be able to run these kind of things. We also need to integrate more on a digital part. We all have our systems and 15, 10 years long contracts, but we need to open those to be able to have third-party products coming in. That's also something that we work with. And then we need to have these efficient and sustainable hospitals. And the whole sustainability issue is actually pretty important for us. Sustainability is not just about CO2 footprint. It's also there. We need to work with that. But it's also about how do we actually get a shift in the competence in our workforce. Right now, we have maybe 95% of all our workforce is healthcare professionals. I foresee that in 10, 15 years, we will be down to 80%. And 20% will be people with another technical background. So we made an integrated partnership with our technical university in Denmark, in Copenhagen, which has happened to be the best in Europe. And they actually do a lot of life science, both education and research, and they've had a hard time getting into the hospitals because we kind of, cultural-wise, it's technical. We know that we need technologies and digitalization, and we think that we can learn it by ourselves, but getting those professionals into the myth of our patient pathways, that makes magic. So we're going to have thousands of these kind of engineering students coming into the hospitals. We're going to have joint professorships. We're going to have associate professorships. A long-term commitment that will change healthcare, because we cannot choose the winners, but we can choose the people that work with us. And that will make magic, I'm quite sure. With Beta Health already, another vehicle for trying to unleash some of the things that goes on internally at the hospitals. Won't drill with that. Rasmussen was saying that yesterday, but it's also a success nationally. So it's been taken on by other hospitals, and now we're making a second program round, which is going to maybe increase the program by 10 to 15-fold. Very excited about that. Then we have a more national level. How do we try to underpin all these things that we want to do? The Danish government, together with our community in Copenhagen and also the region and the hospital, have pointed out an innovation district Copenhagen. It's a completely copy by Kendall Square thinking. But getting out some of these ideas that will also leverage financing, will leverage some of the focus can be actually on Copenhagen. That is some of the ideas that we need to do. And then, we also have been supported by the government, and they have had a life science strategy for the last 3, 4, 5 years, and now the next one is coming out. And look what it says: focus on partnerships. I also say there's more investment needed and all that. We all know that. But this focus on partnerships is there to be, and we need to have it in the long run, because otherwise it won't be viable. So we have an ecosystem that looks like everybody else's: industry, universities, hospitals, government, investment funds. And I'm not think we should coordinate all of that. It has to be out there somehow, but we need to figure out when they overlap, how do we get those overlap to work even better. And in the end, acceleration. We need to figure out how we have a lot quicker impact than we have now. So every time we do these things, it's with a view of how to accelerate change and how to accelerate impact. So to sum up, innovation as a fourth core task at the hospital, especially here at Rigshospitalet, we think it has a huge potential. We need to work multidisciplinary, and collaborations with private actors are absolutely necessary. And then we do think that it might have also potential transformative impact, not just in Denmark, but across the Nordics, across Europe, across the world. Then we also have a point saying we also need to focus on implementation, because even though we have this driver for change, we need to make people very good at actually adopting change. That's where some of the initiatives with the D2 and our management comes in. So we need to mature our management to be able to take on these new tasks. Very important. And then the internationalization, like being here, talking to you. It's important to get out there, talk about it, get a new view of how you do things, because we have a tendency to be able to invent the same wheel over and over and over again. So we need to join up. And then we need acceleration. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin.